Welcome to Real Voices of Recovery. I'm your host, Justin. The idea of this podcast got started because I believe that we all have a story that needs to be shared with each other to bring light and hope into our lives, and that recovery is possible. And it takes a tribe of community of others, of like-minded people to make that possible. So welcome to Real Voices of Recovery. So welcome to episode 1 of Real Voices of Recovery. I'm Justin. I am joined today by Karin. We wanted to do this podcast because we think it's important that everyone has an opportunity to share their journey and that we can all find power and inspiration from those stories.
Absolutely. Yeah, I grew up in what was a wonderland at the time. I'm from Easton, Palmer Township. We moved here in 1973, and there was nothing here at the time. So I watched a lot of growth for the better and for the worse, of course. When we moved here, there was like 3 houses, maybe 4 on our block. It was very tight, and it was then the adults did their thing and the children did their thing. Like it was one big family. My brother and I are both adopted. So, and we are 8 years apart. We were actually both born in New York, but we moved here when I was 6 months old. It was, it was a unique dynamic in the fact that we were kind of away from all of extended family. So it was my brother, my mom, and my dad, and myself. And the extended family was, put it this way, I am a Puerto Rican that grew up with Irish, English, Swedes, So nobody figured out when I was younger that I was the dark spot in the family photo for quite a long time. So I was like 18, but I hesitate to say, but I think that my brother and I felt a little bit like because we were adopted that we weren't quite fitting in with the rest of them. But, that could have been just us and our projection of it as well. But we had stuff,
Right.
It was what it was. My dad was a fireman and an engineer. He traveled the world. Mm-hmm. My mom was a Samaritan, if you will. She took care of us kids, but she was also a real involved in church and community. In fact, she got sick many years later. This was many years later. And it always amazed me that when we had her funeral, people were like, oh my God, I had no idea she was sick. She was sick for 13 years. And no one ever knew it because she was busy taking care of the world. And she didn't talk about what was going on with her. She just wanted to give and give. And I don't know where that came from. But I certainly hope that someday I make that side of her proud.
Well, it sounds like you come from a family of service.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that was the thing. It was like you were expected to help your neighbor. It wasn't always necessarily to help each other, but you were expected to help a neighbor. And that was non-negotiable. That's important. Mm-hmm. It's very important. And I feel like it's a non-negotiable now for my kids,
Right. So community.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Did you know you were adopted, or was it something that kind of was revealed to you later?
They always told us that we were adopted. So we had that knowledge. And I say, I imagine as a parent who's adopted a child, it's very difficult to decide what you're going to do about that. Mm-hmm. For our family, my brother and I always knew. And I say that was a blessing and a curse. At one point, we didn't have that thing where we became, 25 years old and we're like, what do you mean you're not my real parents? On the other hand, I always grew up feeling like I wasn't wanted from the very beginning, and it wasn't like a very conscious thought. It was there, and adopted people that I've spoken to over the years, same thing. We all had the same syndrome. Like we were, no matter what our lives turned out to be, no matter how great they were, we always had the thing that we were not wanted. We were a mistake. We were given away. We were, all this stuff, the anger and the emotions that go with that. So again, blessing and a curse. I mean, I'm certainly glad I'm not 50 years old now finding out that they weren't my parents, and searching for that. But at the same time, it was tough. It was tough.
Right. So you feel like led into like self-esteem and things like that?
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
I was adopted too at 5 days old, and
Nice.
I
Yeah.
was one of those ones that found out later.
All right.
And,
See?
I still carry those feelings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was it like, growing up as a teenager? How were things in school? Did you have a lot of friends?
Well, our home environment was a little bit shaky in the fact that my dad was a drinker. So I learned to become the chameleon, I guess, as we do. So in school, I was friends with everybody.
Right.
If I was in a group full of athletes and cheerleaders, I could adapt. In fact, I made my best friend that way. It didn't matter like what room I was in. So I had a lot of friends from a lot of different areas. Again, blessing and a curse. There had been a really big problem at one point back in the 80s, and they were going to have this big race fight at lunchtime the one day. And I had a real tough time because I had friends everywhere and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know I was Puerto Rican at the time, or I would have just stood in the middle.
Right.
But, and it was really difficult. I had friends in the Black community who actually protected me that day, which was really, really cool.
So, all those things going on, when did substances come into your life?
I think about this question a lot because, there's so many things that happened along the way. The really first thing I remember about my own personal experience was being probably like 13, 14, and I had bronchitis. And back then, man, they just delved out the cough medicine with codeine. And it was just not a thing back then. So I remember taking that. And at the time, I could never have put words to what it was. But now I can look back and say that there's a chaos that runs nonstop when you live in a codependent alcoholic family. And it's a noise that you hear so often you don't know you hear it. So when I took that medicine, that noise stopped. And kind of like dipping in a warm bath, it just all went away. So obviously that was an impression on me because I still remember it, And that was the first time I remember that. But I don't know, using is a difficult thing because it's a disease of progression. And I didn't know over the next, so many years that anything that I did was going to lead to what it ultimately led to. But that was my first real experience with that escape, from that chaos.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I guess call it the disease, consistent discomfort, that we experience.
It just becomes our normal.
Do you feel like that was something that was always with you? Or do you think things contributed to it, the different traumas or experiences in life?
Yeah, I mean, I I always kind of say, is it nature versus nurture? Well, here's the thing, I grew up in an alcoholic household and over the course of my lifetime had, as many people do, a lot of trauma inside and outside of the home. But when I found my birth family, I found out that there's, mental illness and drug use and stuff. So I think it's both. I think that we have inherent genes that get the switch flipped if certain elements align, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's my perspective of it. Because it's both. For me, it turned out to be both. I didn't know growing up that I had this family with this biological family that had these issues. And I think that trauma obviously has a lot to do with it. Experiences have a lot to do with it because you learn your fight or flight, your survival mechanisms from from what happens to you. I mean, I remember being 5 years old. The very first trauma I ever remember in my life was I had a little girl, a little friend in the neighborhood. Her name was Mimi, and she had childhood cancer, and I didn't know, because parents hide stuff from you because they're protecting you. And I do understand that as a parent myself now. But she died.
Mm-hmm.
And one day she was there, and the next day she just wasn't. And I couldn't comprehend that this death, you know. And I remember being on my swing set and pretending like I was somebody else, and always in this fantasy world as a kid. I mean, I had my own talk show. My mom used to say that she would look out the back window and be like, who the hell is she talking to? And I would be out there with my own pretend talk show. And I had a period where I didn't answer unless you called me Marie Osmond. And I'm talking 6 months, would not answer. So you start to see that coping mechanism really early, and that was me escaping into that fantasy world, because my mind couldn't cope. It couldn't comprehend. It could not deal with what was happening. And then as a kid, by the way, everybody's telling you that what you're seeing, you're not seeing. They accepted the fact that I was upset about her death, but I didn't go to her funeral, and it was never mentioned again. She was just gone, so I'm not blaming them for the decisions that they made, but what I guess my point is, these things start early. These coping mechanisms and survival mechanisms start early, in ways that we can later connect, I think, to the disease. But at the time, we do what we can with the level that we're at. So, as a child, we're going to make up imaginary friends, and we're going to see monsters in the closet, and our parents are going to flip on the light and tell us that they're not real. But then we see monsters in real life, and they do the same thing. And I think that creates some serious issues later on when you doubt everything about your own reality and what you're seeing and feeling, and if you're right or wrong, and that confidence issue that you were talking about.
Absolutely. And I think, there's always a core root to things. I believe that, with the disease of addiction, things contribute to it becoming alive in us. I think it's always there, kind of, you're talking about the fantasy world and the escape from reality. Yeah, you definitely can trace it back to, when we're younger, of, some people are like, well, kids do that.
Right.
But then it continues as you age.
Right.
And it becomes different things. For me, I think about it was comic books is how it started. I always had to have them all. And, I thought my life would be complete as long as I got all the ones I was looking for, and I'd get them, and I still felt the same way.
Gosh.
So, I mean, what was it like using substances? I mean, at one point, did it just surpass where you thought it would take you?
Yeah, I had a car accident. I was actually hit by a drunk driver head on when I was 17. So between that surgery and, the issues I was having with my neck and my back, it was a really common practice, in 2002 to give out pain medicine, and that's kind of where it started. And at one point, I think my doctor saw that I was getting a little carried away. So, and this was just the family doctor. And he put me on a different pain medication, which was new and was not addictive,
What was that?
That was tramadol.
Okay.
Which we now know it's one of those things where, this one was, this is to replace, your Percocet or whatever I was taking at the time. This is to replace that because this isn't addictive. They just came out with it. It's this, it's that. And, it is, and that was the beginning of a really big problem for me. I would take the medication and, I don't think I knew at the time that it was what it was doing for me emotionally, because I trusted the fact that it wasn't addictive. It wasn't until I had an issue in the relationship that I can only describe as, it broke me. It literally broke me. We're talking descent into madness. The floor was no longer there, and I'm just free falling and not knowing what to do. and it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And I don't know why I started taking extra. Like, I don't know if it was because I was legitimately forgetting, or because I was so distraught I didn't care. I really don't know. But I started to take more of the medication and find out, like, hey, you know what? This is making me feel like I don't want to jump off a cliff. And we know now that tramadol has an antidepressant quality to it. So, that was something that I wasn't aware of at the time. So, like, that's really the point where I think that everything started to go really wrong. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was the right thing to do because it was making me feel better. And geez, what harm could come to, what could it possibly harm? If I feel better and it's not addictive, well, what's the big deal?
Yeah. Right. And it's coming from a doctor. So
and it's coming from a doctor.
You have that illusion or whatever you want to call it of there's nothing wrong with this.
Right. Like it was okay. And it wasn't until like a few years ago that they started labeling that as an opioid. Now, mind you, this was 13 years ago.
Right.
But 13 years ago, it was still not labeled that way. It's not labeled that way until now, when it became an issue.
So, during that period, did that lead you to other substances? And did it start to, I like to say, take you places without your permission?
Yeah. What happens is that all or nothing, I guess, a mentality comes to you. What you don't realize is the physicality of it. So I did not realize that what was happening to me physically is that I was becoming A, physically dependent on a substance, and B, emotionally put in a certain sort of chemical soup, where I felt good.
Right.
But what was happening was, I would run out and then I would feel so sick and, all this stuff. And I didn't get that. I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand that was withdrawal. Yeah. I had no freaking clue. So in between these bouts of withdrawal, I'd have to substitute it with something, and usually that would end up being a different pain medicine or, something like that. But what started to happen is that I started to look for not so legal ways of making myself feel better. And that's the thing is, like, I don't know if people understand, it comes a point where it's not about getting high anymore, but it's just about feeling normal. Because I had a job, man. I was in banking. I became a banking VP and I'm doing this, I'm on community government and things are going awry for me. Like nobody knew what was going on. So I had to hide those withdrawal days, those days of the descent into madness, if you will, where, man, you just want to do anything to feel normal. So, yeah, ultimately, and it wasn't until many years later, I started drinking in between those bouts.
So basically just to kind of function. And,
yeah.
It goes back to what you said at the beginning, the chameleon, those traits, how we can manipulate and evolve them to one we're using to hide what's really going on.
Yeah.
And the things that happen in the darkness, like you're working at a bank, you're a VP in a bank, and you're working in local government, and no one has a clue.
Yep.
It just shows you how powerful it is.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point did you think, I need to do something about this? And maybe you didn't even know what it was, but you just felt like compelled to, I can't do this anymore.
I think that there were several points, but, I think that the key was that I was starting to feel that way and I had no clue what to do. And that's why I do this. That's like why I do I talk to people. This is why I do everything I do. People need to know what I didn't know. There is a light, there is a way out. And I did not know that. I really thought that this was going to be my life forever and that I was somehow going to continue on this path and probably die at some point because I became so suicidal in those in-between jaunts, where I felt like I can't I'm not going to make it through another withdrawal. Like I couldn't stand the thought of going through another one.
Right.
But I think the beginning of the end was when COVID. We have our own business. And on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, we were told that at 8 o'clock we would be shutting down for 2 weeks. Now, I had no food in my refrigerator. I had just paid bills. We had no money in our account. And we had to shut our business down with no income, nothing, right? We had lost our home, which devastated me more than I realized at the time. We moved into a rental, and all this, like a month later, we had no money, no food, no nothing. And I've got 3 boys in my house. So I felt like a huge failure. I felt like I had everything that had gone wrong in our finances, or you name it, I put it on myself. I just couldn't see tomorrow at that point. I didn't have any way to know how anything was going to ever work out again. That's how I felt. Like I just felt like I failed the family, and I failed my kids especially. It just broke my heart, and I couldn't stand the reality that I was living in. So it just became about really being excessive, where now I was, taking pills and I was drinking, and it was a mess. It was a hot mess. I just didn't want to wake up. So that was where I started in the psych unit at that time, and COVID had just started. What a friggin' nightmare to be in a psych unit when COVID just started. What a nightmare. What an absolute nightmare. So that was that was the beginning of the end. It was just, I couldn't live anymore, and I just wanted to die, and I was trying really hard, like really hard.
So you went into like an inpatient facility.
Yeah.
And how long did you stay there?
Yeah, so I spent about a week there. I don't want to say it didn't take, but I sort of detoxed, but what they put me on didn't help me. Mm-hmm. And I just was like thinking, I can live like this. I was like, this is what it's going to be like. This sucks. I felt horrible. I didn't want to live like that.
Right.
Yeah, it was horrible.
What was the next step you took, or decision you made to continue that recovery process?
I lasted a few months, and then I just, the drinking got worse because it was easier. It was everybody was drinking in COVID. That's all there was to do. Mm-hmm. If you had to escape and you were having issues getting to a doctor, or your medications or your pharmacy, closed, whatever the case may be, it was a nightmare to be an addict. It was very difficult to maintain that. I don't want to call it a high, because it was not, like I said, it was not a high at that point for me anymore. I just wanted to feel numb. At that point, I just wanted to feel numb. So it became very difficult to maintain the numb, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Drinking whatever I could get, from the liquor store, the mini market. And I just drank and I drank and I drank. And I remember sitting in my garage and drinking. And the next thing I knew, my kid and my husband were walking over me to go into the house, and it was like 12 hours later or something like that. I don't know. That was a low point for me, to know that my kid saw me like that. But I think, that my husband started to feel like, well, I can't hide this. Mm-hmm. How do I hide this when you're passed out on the garage floor? So I went into a detox in Horsham. And that was my first experience with the recovery community, because, we would have group meetings and group therapies and music therapy and all these different things that were going on there. And it exposed me a little bit, very begrudgingly, by the way, to stuff I did not, I didn't want to friggin' talk about my stuff. Like, that was the whole point. Like, I wasn't ready to talk about my stuff. So I detoxed there, and because I had signed myself in, I signed myself out after the 3 days. And then I came home to, very eggshell light home, because nobody knew what to do, say, is she going to be drunk? Is she going to this, that? And it made me sad. It made me sad that I had done that to my family. And this just the same thing happened again in another several months. So that time I really bottomed out. I had some really bad, my family basically shut me out. My husband was like, I got to protect my kids, and locked me out of the house. And
so was there like any ultimatums, or that was just
it was just kind of like, he tried very hard, because I would, at the time, our home that we were losing was kind of in limbo because of COVID. Like, there weren't sheriff sales, there weren't things like that. So the house was empty. I was going there and I was drinking. And I was just like, this is great because there's nobody here. And I can do whatever the F I want, and I can drink however I want, and I can just not wake up ever. And I don't have to worry about my kids finding me dead. And that's what I wanted, man. I was like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know there was ever going to be a way out. It was unfathomable to me that there'd be a way out. So I just wanted the lights out. So for about a week straight, my husband would come and he would call an ambulance, and the ambulance would come. And many thanks to those drivers for what they did for me, and the police to come, and they would try, and they didn't know what to do, because I would go to the hospital, and then they would get me full fluid and wash everything away, and I would leave and go back and drink. It was for a week straight. This is what we did. And then finally, the ambulance came and the police came on the last day, before I really got into help that worked. Third time's a charm. It finally took, was me sitting there, and I was so drunk that I wasn't drunk anymore. Like, there was no way for me to get drunker. I drank and every morning I'd wake up and I think, are you freaking kidding me? I woke up again? Like, I can't even kill myself. I was saying, like, I couldn't kill myself to save my life. Like, no matter what I did, I could not die.
Right.
And I couldn't live in the environment I was in either. So I was like, all right, you just kind of, I had no hope. I had nothing, man. And I'm just like kind of praying to whatever God, saying, like, I don't know what you want for me, because you clearly don't want me dead, but I can't live like this either. And the ambulance and the police left because I said, look, I'm not going. I did later that day, October 2nd, I believe it was, say that I would go to rehab. It was a sober decision at that point. Mm-hmm. Well, as sober as you're going to get,
right,
in that, And I went, and I do remember all of a sudden having a panic attack before they were going to come for me, and just being like, I don't want to go. Please don't make me go. Please don't make me go. I said some nasty things to my husband at the time too. It was just this sort of panic came out, But long story short, I ended up at Horsham for the third time. Well, it was the third time I was somewhere. It was the second time I was at Horsham. And you know what made the difference? When I got there, I was so ashamed to go back. I thought, oh my God, this is a nightmare. I'm going back, and what are they going to think? And, here I am still wondering what other people are going to think of me. And then the doctor, looks and welcomes me back and says, so what's going on? Why are you back? And it was like, you're not going to chastise me. You're not going to tell me what an idiot I am. You're not going to, that from that point on and all the times forward, that's what made the difference. Is that I had people who didn't judge me, who were there to help me and not smush me down and make me feel worse than I already felt. They accepted me with no judgment. And from that point on, that was what made the difference. That's when I realized there was help, it was my projection that people were judging me in rehab, and that's what made the difference when I came home, because my husband greeted me 1,000% different than he did the first time. And it was, hey, I'm here. And that was it. That's what it took. It just took people to love me, for me to feel that love. And the way for me to have felt that love was to not be judged. And that's when I started feeling something positive again.
That's good. I think that pure acceptance of
unconditional
who you are and what is happening.
Yeah.
that's where healing can really begin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're saying that felt like the atmosphere was different at home, that you felt accepted, and that was important to you. So what happened after that?
I started to get really active in trying to help other people through meetings and recovery centers. I really wanted to shout from the rooftops to people that there was a way out, like, because I didn't know and I wanted people to know. So I got pretty active in that, and it was kind of came full circle when I was going in front of the community government that I had been serving to try and bring them that information. And one thing that happened when I did that was people were coming up to me, people that I thought this whole time were judging me, by the way, and saying, hey, you know what? I'm in recovery. Or, hey, you know what? My son or my daughter's in rehab right now. Or that, man, that really, I walked out of there that day feeling like, how silly I was to spend all that time worrying about that, but also so at peace knowing that, it was, look, I don't want to say it wasn't just me, but that they felt comfortable to come up to me and to share that with me. When I looked at it and I thought, you're kidding, when some of the folks told me this. You're freaking kidding.
No idea. Huh?
No idea. So just became active in that. And I started learning a lot about how our veterans were struggling. I just tried really hard to talk to everybody and anybody that I could. I just tried to follow the path, and every day was different. And I just tried to, be there for my family and start to be present.
So you kind of feel like at the point where, you came home, that you were just motivated to do something. You just dived right into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That there wasn't any type of conflict in your mind of, should I do this? Should I try that? It just kind of just happened.
Well, yeah. And I think that, part of it too is that, I got into a little trouble. I want to set the record straight on this. I had gotten sober and then got in trouble for something that I did way, way, way before I got sober. Okay.
The wreckage.
Yes. And it was the day I came home from rehab that I got in this trouble. No matter what happens, I was going to stay sober and life was going to work out. And I was just going to have to deal with the wreckage of the past,
Right.
It was consequences. So, I had no idea what was going to happen with that. And it wasn't until way, way later that anything, like, I think it was like a year later that even anything came out of it, or, didn't come out of it in this case. I struggled with stopping to feel sorry for myself, because I was going through these troubles and all this stuff. But here's the thing. Once I got sober, all this stuff started to happen. We got our house back, by the way. Now, mind you, we're getting kicked out of the rental. The owner died and the family wanted to sell the place. So we're about to be homeless, right? And I get a call from the mortgage company, and the mortgage company is like, yeah, it's COVID. Everybody's losing their home. We don't want your house. How about we restructure? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Now, that's my childhood home, by the way, that I grew up in. That was a sign. Like, sometimes you need to be punched in the face to be told that things are going to turn around. That was that punch in the face. We all went back home and we live there now. It's amazing. But yeah, I was a crusader, and I think a lot of us get that way in the beginning too. I was a crusader, man. I was bringing the power to the people, at the time.
Well, I think that's important, that we've had these experiences and when we can use them for the good. I don't really believe in putting on stipulations on being able to help people.
Right.
If it's 1 to 100 days, we all have something we could say to someone to help that connection. And putting, stipulations or gatekeeping certain things, I think is unfair and it's unjust to the recovery community and people trying to find a new way to live,
100%. I agree with you.
So when we talked a couple weeks ago, you had a surgery, 2 years ago? You want to talk a little bit about that?
It was funny because I was actually at the recovery center, the first Northampton County Veterans Drop-In Center. I was 8 months sober. And I had gone to the doctor. I had been having headaches, gone to the doctor, did MRIs, did all this stuff. But it was a hearing test that actually sent me for a different kind of MRI. And I had done that a couple days before this opening. So I'm sitting there at 9 o'clock, but I get a phone call from my doctor. It was like, hey, you have a brain tumor. And I sat on the steps. And I swear to you, this is the truth. I actually said to the doctor, F you. I did, because I was like, and I didn't say F,
Right.
I said the full word.
Right.
Because I was like, first of all, just got sober. And all this stuff just happened to me, and you're going to put this on me. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, it was also like, I just went through all this. Bring it the frig on. I am ready. I don't care. Whatever you have to do, say, it doesn't matter. I'm okay. And I'm going to be okay. I knew I could handle it. And the thing is, I would have had this type of brain tumor. It was the size of a golf ball. So I would have had this brain tumor way before I got sober. Okay. If I found out about that brain tumor before I got sober, I would have used it as an excuse to check out. That would have been like, oh, that's it. That's it. He doesn't want me. He wants, that's it. And I would have used it as an excuse.
That's good insight.
Absolutely used it as an excuse, but I didn't find out about it then. And I didn't find out about it on day one of being sober. I found out about it on, the 8th month or whatever it was, where I had learned that I could survive a day. I had learned that I could help I had also learned how to be patient and sit still, and know that in silence I can live, So I learned stuff that was invaluable to getting through the brain tumor.
From
recovery. If I had not been where I was, I would not have made it. I'm telling you. I don't think I would have healed as fast as I did. I don't think that I could have ever made it through the surgery. Like those months before the surgery, it wasn't even that long. I think it was like a month or two before I actually had surgery, because I got in right away, could have been horrifying. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I wasn't like, taking it lightly, but my life is this. Okay. We live in humor in our house, and for 45 days I had this headache, and I'm walking around the house. The dogs were even acting weird, licking my head. And we're joking on the porch going, oh, it's probably a brain tumor. And I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember Arnold Schwarzenegger with the Kindergarten Cop. It's not a tumor. Yeah. So they're all walking around going, it might be a tumor. And then, going, no, it's not a tumor.
Right.
So I find out it is a tumor, and I sit everybody down on the back porch, beautiful summer day, and I tell them it's a tumor. And to this day, I have no idea who said it. But one of the kids goes, so it is a tumor. And that was it. That's how we dealt with it. It was just, we had been through so much, and things had gotten so much better between us and amongst us. And I learned so much about how to survive and be patient and be still and believe in a higher power. And know I wasn't alone. Most importantly, no, I wasn't alone, both here and above, that it was going to be fine. I did have then the surgery, which was no joke. Most of the surgery, it's like a 9.5-hour surgery. Most of the surgery is getting through your skull, from what I understand. It's like getting through that bone. Had the surgery, but isn't it funny that 8 months before I found out about the surgery, I wanted to die. And then I found out about the surgery, and I no longer wanted to die, but if I did, I felt like those 8 months were the best 8 months of my life, and it was like, okay, to move on to whatever other world we have there. But before the surgery, it occurred to me, it was about 30 seconds before they put me under, and it occurred to me that what was about to happen, none of it was in my control. Like nothing that I had done in my life really materialistically mattered. None of the money I had or didn't have mattered. My house didn't matter. My car didn't matter. Vacations, all that stuff, none of it mattered in that moment. The only thing that mattered was the love that I left my kids. And what was about to happen was out of my control. It was an amazing thing that happened to me that I try and carry with me. We all have amnesia the further we get away from these events, but when I tell my story, I tell people nothing matters but the love you leave, period. It's the energy and the love that you leave behind. That's it. That's actually who we all are. It's the fellowship and it's the service that we do for each other. That's what we leave behind. So that gave me a lot of energy to heal and to move forward in a time where, by the way, my face is distorted. Nothing like being a vain person and waking up from surgery and finding that your face is facing the floor. Half your face is pointing down. That was tough. That was really tough. And it still sometimes bothers me. You want to talk about one day at a time. It was, all right, I hate the way my face looks, laying there and being like, all right, I just got to get through today. That was hard. But I watched funny stuff. I watched comedy. I watched funny shows. I watched anything that I could. I tried to stay away from anything that made me sad or even pensive.
Good idea.
Yeah. So, and I laughed. I found a show that I had never seen before. So I laughed out loud at it. And that was, I think that I healed a lot faster because of that.
Because of laughter.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we leave behind that, I had a mentor that used to say love wins. And,
yeah.
When you come with love, you can't go wrong. And healing power of a family, of a higher power, or whatever it is we choose to believe in. I think it's where recovery's about, and
absolutely.
The fact, you persevered through so much that you're here today, sharing these experiences, and we never know who they're going to touch.
Mm-mm.
And that not necessarily with the expectation that it will change someone's trajectory of their life, but your story has power and it's important to be heard because sometimes that's all we really have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those things I think will echo through time, know.
I hope so. I hope all of our stories do.
So wondering, do you have a closing message for anyone who's listening today?
I started doing comedy. It's a year now, and I've come pretty far in it. Nothing like being in an environment where everybody's judging you to not feel like you're being judged, right? I'm trying to live my life like I'm not being judged and everything's, and that's all that's happening to me. But, I had some people in the beginning tell me I'll never be a comedian. Mm. And that's a good hobby for me to get me out of the house, and that kind of devastated me at the time, right? But I persevered because I knew from a higher power and from the work I had done was that I always had to do what was in my heart. When someone tells you you can't, when someone tells you you shouldn't, listen to yourself, listen to your heart, and then remember who the F you are and keep going. You have a gift that you need to bring to the world, and you know what it is. If you sit long enough, you'll hear it. And don't let anybody tell you not to bring that gift out. And just keep doing it. Because somebody needs you. Somebody needs that gift. And it's a sin not to share that with the world. So remember who the F you are. That's my advice.
Thank you for coming out today, spending time with us.
Thank you for
being vulnerable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope someone hears something they need to hear.
So where can we see you local?
Yes, actually. I just did Music Fest, so that was really awesome. And then August 18th and 19th, the Easton Mayor's Council and Just Be You Entertainment is doing a children's festival down in downtown Easton.
Well, if you get a chance, go out and support her. And thank you for listening today.
Oh, thank you, guys.
I would like to thank all of you for listening. And remember to always keep up the good fight.